to Blaze News, The Mandate. We are in the nation's capital all week. I am Jill Savage, along with Matthew Peterson, as always, and Chris Bedford. He's here. It's his town. So Bedford, thanks for letting us crash the party once again.
You're always welcome.
We have a great show for you today. Bedford's going to have more on Earth Day a little bit later, but there's a lot of history that is happening right now in the nation's capital. But I think that we should take this all the way back, not just a little bit back, right? Not even Donald Trump 1.0, but I think that we need to go 250 years back, because over the weekend, it was the shot heard round the world. It was Lexington and Concord. We all learned about it, though, in school, Bedford. So what do we need to make in 2025 about what happened 250 years ago?
Yes, the 250th anniversary of essentially what became the beginning of the American Revolution. And it was kind of, I had a Massachusetts-centric education. It's kind of funny. I think a lot of people learn a lot more of their state history than they do of the world history and the country's history. So when I was growing up, the American Revolution was Paul Revere, Concord, Lexington, Bunker Hill, with the Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre. If you told me that the revolution was basically fought and won in the South, that would become a surprise to young me. But it turns out, of course, it's true, and my family fought in the South and in the other parts of the Northeast as well, for both sides. But there are important lessons to learn from these men and boys who gathered that early morning in Lexington, hours before the dawn. Just about 80 men gathered in parade formation and with orders not to shoot when the British marched into town. The British weren't having none of it. They were belligerent. They were angry, and they opened fire and killed, I think, 8 men, wounded 10. Shattered a small town. And then they got to Concord, and by that point the word had spread that, well, the British had come out before looking for armaments, and nothing, it had always been bloodless. The Boston Massacre, despite kind of the name, which was an important propaganda coup for men like Paul Revere, was a violent riot that was met with arms when a soldier was hit in the head so hard with an ice ball that he was knocked to the ground and dropped his gun. So nothing had happened like this, where they just opened fire in a town. And the Minutemen, so famously named because of their ability to muster so quickly, had gathered by the hundreds on the hill overlooking the Old North Bridge, which is right by my home. It's where I used to go with my parents. It's where in high school I used to go sneak beers in the evening, have a cigar, and think about that history. And when you're trying to preserve the American inheritance and the American dream, you're trying to fight for that, it's really important to know what that inheritance is. And that this was not an army by a long shot. This was men and boys who gathered to fight a real professional army without losses to its record. An empire that spanned the entire world, from one end to the absolute other, from East Asia all the way to South America and the Caribbean. Absolutely massive force, and one that everyone was related to. We were largely, despite the kind of modern propaganda, and we're a nation of immigrants, we were largely English and German. These were people, they spoke the same language, they had the same history, they had the same king, they had the same culture, they had the same rights, so they thought they ought to have the same rights as Englishmen. But they were noble and brave, regular farmers and citizens who gathered there and sent the British packing for what was ended up being a very, very long day. So imagine if you're a British soldier, you get woken up at like 9 p.m. at night in your barracks, you get in these little boats, you go across the Charles River, you march for 15 miles, you stop briefly for a massacre, and then you continue on to Concord. And before you know it, hey guys, guess what? You have to run back. And you'll be getting shot at almost the entire way until they were relieved by a column coming out of Boston, from behind walls, from inside of farmhouses, from fields, and they're just going to pick you off, and it's going to be a serious day of cardio with very little sleep. It was a rough day for them, and it started the American Revolution because the colonies, some of them were very loyalist. They were loyal to the crown. All of them were. They said, whoa, this has gotten out of hand. Whoa, those radical, we knew those radicals in Massachusetts were fixing for a fight for a long time, but this seems like overt English aggression by the crown. This seems like a whole nother level. In those battles, well, the massacre and the battle, there's always a fight between Lexington and Concord, who fired the shot heard around the world, but I say Concord. it comes together and culminates into what is the American Revolution, what is our country now, and what we actually have to fight to remember and to fight to save.
Huge. One couple bullet points from everything you just said. First thing is Massachusetts stands apart, even though the entire K through 12 system has fallen apart throughout this entire country, right? Massachusetts stands apart though because it was one of the states that used to require, and I believe still does, teachers to actually know things about a topic. So you actually had to know something about history in order to teach history. Crazy idea, I know. But that's especially true. The importance of that is especially, it's dawning on everyone here, I notice, because of what Trump has said about the 250th anniversary. Right? Very, very important. When you walk around here, you start thinking about how important it is that we celebrate those 250 years. And what you point out is the problem is if those stories aren't shared, if people don't know that story and they don't share it as a people, it's hard to say that we even have a country.
Yeah, you need to know your past to preserve your future. And I remember a very sad telling from Sandy Stoddart, who's a great sculptor in Scotland, was the royal sculptor for years, and has done some of the wonderful works in Edinburgh and Paisley outside of Glasgow. And he was looking at a statue, and I said, well, what's our chance to build this, to rebuild this civilization, to make England and to make Britain great again? And he said, we can't even preserve the things that were handed to us. Forget about create new ones. He felt alone and outnumbered. And that struck me as a really sad and somewhat just a telling remark from people. Of course, it's not always true. It turns out that when Notre Dame, for example, burned, a lot of people were quick to say, we're not going to be able to rebuild this. We can't even do the kind of craftsmanship that we used to be able to achieve. And that's not true. Talking to incredible architects, I learned that the buildings themselves are the teachers. The history itself is the teacher. You have to go to these places. You have to put your hand in the water where Washington crossed the Delaware. You have to stand on the hill where the British charged up to take out our batteries at the Battle of Monmouth and failed. You have to go to Yorktown. You have to go to Philadelphia, breathe in that air. And those places, I like them. Washington, D.C. has a lot to offer, but so much of Washington, D.C.'s history is man-made. They're monuments to great achievements. There's a lot of legislating that's happened here, a lot of Supreme Court rulings, a lot of political decisions. But if you want to go to the places where people bled, people fought, people put it all on the line and are buried on the field, literally, you have to go not too far outside of D.C., an hour-long drive where you start to get to the rest of the country where these stories were made and learn what they can teach you. Go to battlefields. Take your kids on battlefield tours. Their iPad is not going to teach them this stuff. You can't park them in front of a History Channel movie. That's for retirees who want to drink beer when their family's going to sleep and watch World War II shows. You got to bring them to these places and show them their history.
Yes, and history, when it becomes alive, it becomes so much more entertaining. People get into it a lot younger if you actually present it in an exciting fashion. Now, we weren't actually able to go through and take the drive an hour away from Washington, D.C. earlier today, but Matthew Peterson and I were able to hit the town here in D.C. They let us out of the studio for a little while.
Yeah, we hit that town hard. It was good.
Yes.
It was good. When we get out of Dallas, it's kind of like the animals getting out of the cage.
We're going to take
locked
you
down in that studio.
We're going to take you first, though. We are stopping by the Supreme Court. Peterson will give you a little bit of a history lesson and so much more. So don't go anywhere. We have a great show for you coming up, and it's all going to start with the Supreme Court coming up next. Stay with us. Well, tariffs are shaking up the global economy, but we know that President Trump has actually gone through and has a silver lining because he has exempt gold and silver bullion from all of those tariffs, so you can go out there and still protect your savings. You can go through and text the number 989898 and text my name, Jill, to that number for your free info kit on Birch Gold. And you can move your IRA or 401k, it can be existing right now, into a tax-sheltered IRA IRA with Birch Gold, and you can do it with no money out of pocket. So Birch Gold has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. Just text my name, Jill, to the number 989898 today and get your free info kit now. Well, the mandate has taken to the streets of D.C. They finally let us out of the studio, Peterson.
We escaped Dallas.
We have. And you know what? We're going to go through a couple different sites throughout the week here in Washington, D.C., but we thought it would be important to start right here outside of the steps of the Supreme Court. And there's been so much going on in Washington, D.C. lately. We actually had protesters that were out here earlier. They were hearing, there was a hearing about LGBTQ and whether you have the right to opt your children out of this in school or not. So we missed all the fun, unfortunately, from all the protesters, but there's still a lot of history that happens right here in this building.
Oh yeah, and I think there's going to be more fun to be had even today throughout this city, which is now all of a sudden, once again, feels completely different than it did before. I'm like a kid in a candy shop every time we come here now because there's so many interesting and good things happening everywhere you go.
So Professor Peterson, I am going to put you on the spotlight. We're going to go through and do a little bit of a history lesson. I want to start just with a brief overview of the Supreme Court and how it became, right? We all know the checks and balances for our federal government. How has this come to be what it is?
Yeah, so three branches of government. You have Congress, who makes the law. You have the executive, who executes the law, and then you have the courts, which are supposed to keep the basis of the rule of law in place in America. So the Supreme Court is there in Article 3 right away from the beginning in the Constitution. There's going to be one court at the top that's going to decide things. It'll be the decider. And the Supreme Court really, no one knew in the beginning what the Constitution was going to look like. That's the great thing about coming to Washington. You can actually see physically in the buildings the Constitution itself made manifest. It's not just a document. It's not an abstract idea or principle. It's actually written into the stone. So, what does the Supreme Court look like? We don't know until a guy named John Marshall. A lot of times people say he's the first Supreme Court justice. He's not, but he's the first influential member of the court who really makes it what it is today. And he establishes that the Supreme Court, yes, does have the power to rule over what the Constitution means. But that doesn't mean the executive also doesn't do that. Doesn't mean Congress should be doing that as well. That people take oaths to the Constitution. But the court becomes, a powerful institution that tries to be the arbiter, really, in constitutional disputes about what it means.
So how does it get all of the power that it then has?
Well, it's not the decider in the way we think of it today. It's almost become tyrannical, I think myself and a lot of other people on the right would argue, because a bunch of things happen. The first thing that happens is after the Civil War, they decide to incorporation, doctrine of incorporation. They take the Bill of Rights, which up to that time was not used in the way that it is today. It wasn't used in court cases the way used today at all. And they say the Bill of Rights will be applied by the federal government to the states. So the states will have to abide by the Bill of Rights. And so all of a sudden, some weird things start to happen. And you see this happen over the course of the next 100 years after the Civil War in American history. And I'll give you an example of this, because this is really crazy when you think about it. If you just read the Constitution, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, right? So Congress shouldn't make a law respecting an establishment of religion, whatever that means. Somehow that is applied now to like small cities in America, in Pennsylvania, who put up a Christmas display. Did Congress make a law? No, it has nothing to do with Congress. There are no laws involved. And is there an establishment of religion? Did they establish a religion, federally by doing that? No, of course not. So you can see the mission creep of the Supreme Court start to grow. And
we see one state after another going through and putting the 10 Commandments back in classrooms, for example, right? They're trying to go through and make sure that they say, okay, well, we're actually going to go with what's written down in these documents and go with that law instead of whatever they just have decided over the few years. But let's go with the turning point. When do things change from the Supreme Court that you are talking about to the Supreme Court that we see now here today?
So a lot of people, even on the new right, it's a great question, miss this. I mean, they forget their history. And the history is that in the 60s and 70s, the court became what we call now the lefty activism that we're used to. That's when it really started. So Warren Court, you start to get in the 60s and 70s, a court that starts to talk about all kinds of cultural issues. It just didn't talk about cultural issues before. Like you weren't talking about, whether some town could legally, regulate the fact that there's strip clubs and say yes or no to them. You just weren't talking about that kind of stuff. In the 60s and 70s, you had all these cases where predominantly people on the left came in and they made everyone think that somehow the Supreme Court is the decider of everything, and it's supposed to tell you whether abortion is good or not and should be legal or not. Which is of course, that's the law. That should be an argument about what the law should be. The Supreme Court should not, in fact, be deciding these things. But most Americans today, because of the 60s and 70s of what happened and the power the court took over the last 100 years, most Americans today think that the court decides a lot of things that it really shouldn't be deciding.
Well, let's bring this into current day, because I'll reference the sign that was just behind us here a few minutes ago when we started this. It said Supreme Coup.
Yeah.
Well, it's only a coup, I feel like, when the leftists don't get their way, right? If it's anything that they're making us subjected to their will, their whatever they wanted, it's not a coup. But when it's something that is done that benefits the right, they go through and say, "Oh, this is absolutely absurd. Nobody should have to go through this." So bring us in to the current day of the Supreme Court, because what we saw out here earlier today, that is not a one-off. That is what we see time and time again here outside of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so the protests are classic American. I mean, this is, by the way, we should be fair. Like, this was what happens. The case that we're talking about, they were saying that the Supreme Court is pulling a coup, is absolutely ridiculous. Jill can say more about it. But anytime you're against the other side in America, you say, that the president is a tyrant, right, if he's not on your side, and the Supreme Court is being tyrannical if he's not on your side. But what we have today is something that really is a problem. It's not just a matter of policy or what you think about one issue. The court has decided, as anyone who watches our show knows that we've been talking about for all these days, the court has decided that all the judges, federal judges throughout the land, that they can stop the executive from making executive determinations. And now there's some tension here that's normal and healthy, right? The courts should throw up blockages to the executive when the executive goes too far. But of course, but now they do it all the time. And with Trump, they've done it more than they've ever done it before. There's no other president who has had so many policies, so many decisions blocked by the courts. And you see that happening now when it comes to immigration. And it's a real problem because the court is saying you can't execute the laws, right? You can't execute the laws this way.
Well, let's bring this then into present day. The show is called The Mandate, after all. We're here to look at Trump versus the deep state, the administrative state. So what needs to happen going forward to make sure that this country that we love, that we're celebrating 250 years of very soon, that it actually gets back to its roots and is able to have potentially another 250 years going forward?
Well, first off, we need to have a really good time at the 250th anniversary celebration, which is coming up soon, and I think is really important for America, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. A lot of friends are working on that. I have high hopes. But what we have to do in one way is really simple, right? It's to get back to carve away all the stuff that's been added over the years to this Constitution and the buildings behind us. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court is very beautiful. It's covered today with all this stuff for construction, but that kind of reconstruction and construction is what we need throughout this town and this system. And the only way to do that is by peeling back the layers that have grown over the years that have rotted the system. So when it comes to the courts, Trump, the executive, has to push back hard against the egregious use of power that you see the Supreme Court taking on.
Well, the mandate takes on Washington, D.C. We'll be here going through for the rest of the week. We're gonna hit a couple of spots in town. They finally let us out of the studio, MP. We're excited.
Yeah, we're roaming. We're gonna be roaming this entire week, and we're gonna bring back some great stuff for all of you.
All right, we'll have more right after this. Well, we were up at the nation's capital earlier today, and it's fitting because BlazeTV actually has our last part of the series for our J6 investigation. It's an in-depth look at J6, and it's dropping today. You can go through and see surveillance footage that you haven't seen before, all the conflicting timelines, right? They say one thing happened, but we hear now that something completely different happened, and all of the serious questions that have been raised about Harry Dunn. You can get all of that in the latest documentary. Now, You can see it streaming now exclusively at Blaze TV. And if you want to see it, go to blazetv.com/J6. That's blazetv.com/J6.
Joining me now is Daniel Turner, the president and founder of Power the Future, and a frequent guest on our show because he provides such phenomenal insight into energy policies, environmental activism, what's going on with the greenies, what's going on with our government. Daniel, thanks for coming back.
Always great to be with you. Thanks for having me back.
So first off, happy Earth Day. It is the 55th Earth Day, I think, in American and world history. How did you choose to celebrate today?
Well, I feel bad for the environmental left because climate change isn't the cool thing anymore. If you look at where the momentum of the leftist activists are, it's burning Teslas. It's El Salvador with MS-13 terrorists, right? It's in other places. The momentum, climate change is now just it's like an old person's cause. It's no longer cool. Now, granted, we are coming out of winter and we've had a fairly mild spring. I'm sure climate activism will pick up once we get our first heat wave. That's when they like to come out in force. But, you know, when one of the high priests of the climate movement, Bernie Sanders, when he's flying his private jets to stop oligarchy tour, you know that even he doesn't believe the climate footprint is real, climate change is real. So maybe climate activism is dying because the lies and the grift of the movement are being exposed more and more, and people are just moving away from it.
I'm old enough to remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out, and old enough to remember when one by one its different predictions were proven false. None of them actually took place. I remember when polar bears were the mascot of the climate, but then it turned out the problem was so many polar bears, they were struggling to find food, and that one was quietly dropped as well from the list of mascots. And now I also remember a lot of young people who seem to be involved. But I walk through my neighborhood and I see some people in Old Town, Virginia, like to put out Halloween decorations, skeletons killed by climate change, but they're always in their 60s and 70s. It is definitely an older set. Has that movement really lost its credit with the youth? Have they picked up a hobby, or have they started caring about some other different kind of policy?
I mean, there's definitely an age perspective when it comes to Earth Day in particular, because it did start in 1970. And even a young Joe Biden back in the day would talk about how when I was a kid growing up in Scranton in the 60s and 70s, you could run your finger across the windshield and wipe the dirt off. And the planet was different in 1970. There's no doubt. Pollution was rampant. Littering was very common, right? When you had garbage, you threw it out the car window. We're not the same country as we were in the 1970s, and that could be a sign of good governance. It's a sign of good regulation. The problem with the climate movement is that it still tries to pretend it is 1970. It still tries to pretend that smokestacks are poisoning us, that coal and fossil fuels are dirty, and that groundwater pollution is killing us. And you hear these sort of bombastic phrases, fracking is killing whole communities, but yet you can't point to one, right? Yeah, people are dying from climate change, but no one has found a climate change casualty. So we're not the same planet we were 55 years ago, and that's a good thing. But the climate left has to convince us that we still live in this past. They're stuck in this era, you know, kind of like Vietnam activists were stuck in that time period. Their hair, their clothing, their beard, their beads, their fringe and hippie clothing, they're still stuck in this time period that no longer exists. And we should see Earth Day as celebrating how far we've come thanks to fossil fuels and thanks to innovation, rather than be mired in this period that no longer exists.
Yeah, I remember the first, I wasn't there, but the first Earth Day, you had Richard Nixon, President of the United States, planted a tree in the White House lawn. It seemed like it was a somewhat bipartisan affair. What changed? When did that begin to shift from, were Republicans duped? I mean, to your point, the rivers in Pittsburgh were lighting on fire outside the steel mills. There were serious issues with the American environment. When did that start to shift from a movement that was set out to accomplish something and really did maybe help in some way to increase literacy of the environment and the effects of littering and the effects of pollution, into one that just needed more and more and more and wanted to gobble up American industry and put us out of jobs and take away our vehicles?
Yeah, that's a phenomena. That's a great question, and we could do hours about this. There is a phenomena that those who work in politics or in policy or in Washington, D.C. know that any group that has power and money will eventually be co-opted by the left. Any group, whether it's education, whether it's a testament to groups like Heritage Foundation and maybe the NRA that they haven't become hardcore lefty orgs, because every other organization, even libertarian ones, will eventually be co-opted by the left. And I think the climate movement is an example of that. What was started with good bipartisan, we need to have better air and better water initiatives. I think leftists look at that and say, there's money, there's power, there's influence, there's the chance to, if you're someone like Stacey Abrams, create an organization, get the IRS accreditation in 6 months, because we know the IRS commissioner, right? We're all friends. And suddenly I get a $2 billion grant, $2 billion grant. We talked about this last time I was on your program. $2 billion grant from the taxpayers for climate stuff. So that's when I think the movement disappeared, is when the left realizes they can co-opt anything, any cause, any issue, because of the money, the power, the influence. And that's kind of the history of communism writ large, right? They never create universities. They just infiltrate what you created. They poison it and destroy it from within. And they did the same to the climate movement.
Yeah, I feel like this was something that was championed by our late Pope, may he rest in peace. One of the most surreal and somewhat hurtful moments, I think, of his papacy was when he went to International Youth Day, just days after the latest round of awful reports from the 70s and 80s and 90s in the Pittsburgh diocese had come out, dealing with some of the awful things that had happened. And his message to the children gathered was that the greatest threat to the future of this planet wasn't Satan, it wasn't war, it wasn't famine and pestilence. It was plastic in the oceans. This is around the time that we also had the moral panic over straws killing the turtles, apparently, which was eventually traced back to a kid's website. And the research was based on a number that he kind of extrapolated. Great on him for being such a go-getter, but it was a fake number. None of it was real. Even that seems to have ebbed a little bit. Is that another symptom of age, or is that just the changes that we've seen also in this country with the problems we've had with jobs and the focus of the American youth?
Yeah, I think the joys of having the climate boogeyman is that it is nameless, it's faceless, it's always evolving, it's never defeated. So you're always asking for more money and more resources, and you can fight this perpetual war forever. And sadly, when the Holy Father jumped onto that, he didn't attack China and India and Vietnam, which do poison the oceans with plastics. He called out, Western countries. Western countries are always flagellating themselves for the sins of Southeast Asia, which is the huge culpable factor in air pollution, in ocean pollution. Southeast Asia is where, if there is anything about climate change, it is all originating there. And yet we're constantly flagellating ourselves on the altar of climate change. And that movement is dying. I think the best thing Joe Biden did for this country is he showed them that 4 years of turbocharging the green agenda gave you high prices, an unstable grid, wealthier enemies, Russia, Iran, China. It gave us nothing. And that was 4 years. And we wasted trillions of dollars. And that was 4 years. Now who's going to run on the climate agenda? I'm sure Pete Buttigieg will in a couple of years when he throws his hat in the ring. They'll all come back to the climate agenda because it's the perfect boogeyman. But do we want to go back to this agenda of more expensive goods, a weaker nation, stronger enemies? That's the only benefit of Joe Biden's administration, is he highlighted the pernicious nature of this death cult of the climate movement and how detrimental it is to your life, your liberty, and your property.
What are some of the lasting impacts of those 4 years and those trillions of dollars that were spent? I know that a lot of the infrastructure projects they attempted to accomplish, as you've come on to talk about, the contracts were never even fully executed, and the work was never actually realized because they couldn't find enough, I guess, lesbian black solar panel builders to do the contracts or the recharge stations.
Yeah.
So just nothing happened. How much of that money spent and those organizations funded and that stuff out the door is having a lasting impact on America, charging the activist class, or has that damage been undone?
No, that damage is going to take a while to undo. I think this current administration and the Doge efforts have stopped a lot of the funding. They've shut off the spigot, so to say. But a lot of that money is already out the door, and what they're going to do with it, I guess we will see come the next election cycle. I'm sure a group like Stacey Abrams was going to educate the activist class about climate change by knocking on doors when it comes to John Ossoff's Senate reelection, right? And they would say, well, no, we're just educating constituents about climate change. They will use it for electoral and partisan purposes. So a lot of that money, sadly, has been spent. I think a lot of the damage that they did, which is ongoing, is they created this enormous culture now of distrust, more distrust in government institutions and government contracts, in government itself, right? When you give out hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, a lot of Republicans are on the dole too. A lot of Republican governors were thrilled to get $100 million grants for wind turbines and solar panels. Now they're addicted to the drug. Right? Joe Biden gave them heroin, and now they want their next hit. And now you have Republicans out there fighting the Trump administration. We need our green tax credits. We need subsidies for these products. That's the damage that the Biden administration did, is he created this dependency, and he poisoned, the future of wind and solar. I'm not a wind and solar advocate, but I'm not a wind and solar adversary either. The marketplace needs to help them evolve. But now, are they going to evolve as proper institutions, as proper commodities with so much poison? They're not. No one knows what wind and solar are now, because wind and solar are tied up with the evils of the Biden administration and leftist nonsense. So he's poisoned the very industry he claimed to care about as well. The damage is going to take a while to undo.
Every time I talk to former Republicans or former Cato staffers around Washington, D.C., and they're starting something new. They're going to focus on finding bipartisan solutions and finding the path toward the middle. I always know that that's code for we're going to find conservative solutions for climate change, whether it's carbon credits or creating a market, as they claim. And it's all because the money is just flowing in. Is that still the case? It seems like a lot of these special interest groups, our Street Institute, wherever else, have over the last couple of years lost a lot of the influence they used to have in Republican corridors of power. They can't just walk into the Trump White House. They didn't build the bridges they need to. The corporations seem lost. Is that still a business model that flourishes and works? Are they just dormant now, or are they continuing to grow?
I think it'll be interesting to see how much those groups can still suckle off of the government teat, right? They can't survive without government dollars. But you're right. All of this bipartisan effort for climate awareness, for bipartisan solutions to fix the climate change is the slippery slope towards becoming a leftist, right? You're not going to get a conservative to first compromise on life or on flag burning but you slowly get them talking about how, you know what, you want your kids, and your kids have been hearing about this crap in school all day. That's how you start getting them. And then little by little, they start slipping. And then, I'm not saying I want women in men's sports and vice versa. I'm just saying we need to create a society. And now your conservative, quote unquote conservative, is now a rhino. And then pretty soon they're just Mitt Romney, right? And that's how the process begins. Climate is the gateway for that. And these groups, they're still out there. They're not dying anywhere. We've talked about this before from friends of ours who have worked in this space for a long time. I'm looking at you, Rick Berman, right? These groups don't disappear when their cause does, because they have 401ks, they have beautiful office space, they have premier parking. They don't want to give that up. So they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep their cause alive. because that keeps them in a very plush lifestyle. So these groups aren't ever going to disappear. That's why the only solution is to thoroughly defeat them. I have no desire on this Earth Day to reach across the aisle to talk to my climate change friends. I want to destroy them. I want to destroy their institutions and their organizations. I want to destroy their catechesis and everything they believe in, because there is no middle ground when you're dealing with neo-paganism and socialism. The only way we can survive is to thoroughly and utterly destroy them, and that's what I've dedicated myself to doing. Happy Earth Day.
I mean, if Rick Berman, if he's still active, man, he's been at it for a while. For those who don't know, he's the character who Thank You for Smoking was based on, a wonderful movie.
Yeah, he's fantastic, Turner, and he taught me a lot early on in my career about not having no compromise and having a backbone. And you know what? The left does this brilliantly. They do not compromise on gender. They don't compromise on abortion. You couldn't get Kamala Harris to give the slightest, she would tell Donald Trump at the debate, we don't believe that about abortion, but she would not put in any condition. She would not put in any limitation. The left does not compromise on their issues. And yet the right is always the one that tries to find middle ground. And Rick Berman taught me a long time ago, we are in a fight for these issues. And why are we going to compromise with the bad guys? And these are the neo-pagans, the climate activists, the Bernies of the world, the John Kerrys who are sipping champagne and condemning African children to work in slave mines to get lithium and cobalt. They are the bad guys, and there is no compromise with them. There is only defeat. So one of the things I love about Donald Trump as well is he has that backbone and that fight in him. We're both from Queens, so maybe I have a bit of that too.
What are some of the things that the Trump administration really does need to focus on in order to really pick that fight to the people who want to destroy American jobs, American energy independence?
Yeah, the clock is ticking for the energy dominance agenda. Now it's only been 3 months, right? So we're not at the threshold yet. But the sooner we get to, and we've already seen lower prices on oil and gas and food, and that's good. The sooner we get to a more sustained, low-cost economy, the American people will forget about the climate nonsense because they just want to survive, right? They're tired of how expensive things are. We just had tax week a couple days ago. I was complaining to you offline about the additional tax bill I got in addition to my tax bills. The American people are tired of life being so damn expensive. If Donald Trump's administration can show that he's brought this one thing, that robust energy, a robust American energy sector brings more affordable life, that's everything. And I know he will. And that's why I believe that thoroughly. I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. It may take some time to get there. He did it in his first administration. But if he can take the economy to that affordability point again, then be gone your stupid wind, your solar, your tax, your carbon credits, your carbon capture, your COP29, your John Kerry's, all of that crap goes out the window. Americans want affordable, quality life again, and energy will bring it.
Daniel Jenner with Power of the Future. Where can people follow you online and find some information about your organization?
Powerofthefuture.com, or if you got a question, if you don't mind, Daniel at powerofthefuture.com. Usually people email me after these interviews, and I love to have conversations with folks who have questions about climate or wind or solar or green or energy. So Daniel at powerofthefuture.com, shoot me an email, and I guarantee you I'll reply. If you're not just saying, like, you're a bald idiot, I don't like you, and I won't reply to that. But otherwise, I'll reply.
Well, Daniel, it was great to see you. We hope you'll come back again soon.
Anytime. Thanks, Chris.
Well, it has been a fun day here in Washington, D.C., and we wanted to take a look, though, Now that Donald Trump is back in office, we wanted to ask you for our question on X today. What do you think is the biggest difference between Trump in his first term and Trump in his second term? So Bedford gets to join in on the viewer feedback as well today. So let's start with not a spooky dude. He writes, the biggest difference is that President Trump finally started cutting out the cancerous people from his administration. I was frustrated with him when he didn't do it during his first term. I must admit, I yelled at the TV quite a bit. I doubt that he was alone, you guys.
Absolutely not. I mean, I remember the office of Tucker's writers had on the wall New York Post cover with all the different faces of the cabinet and the appointees on it, and they were just Xing them off one by one. It was like the Iraqi kill sheet that we had in 2003. Yes. It was a grim affair, and so many of them also weren't that serious, and a lot of them turned on the president very quickly. And it's like Matt and I were talking about this earlier. If you were in Washington, D.C. in 2017 and you left by 2020 or so, you would have no idea what the culture is like right now. You'd have no idea what Republicans are like. It would be like someone talking about what's going on in the FBI who retired 50 years before that. They wouldn't be able to tell you anything because that's how much it's changed. There were periods of time in that first White House where I know from people sitting in these meetings that the president would make some kind of proclamation and an emergency meeting of his top people would be held where someone would say, what are we going to do about this? The media's going to freak. We have to stop this. We have to stop this. What are we going to do? And then they would start leaking. And everything was a panic. Nothing was normal. This is not normal. You don't see that anymore. You don't see any of that kind of reaction. Some kind of thing, the massive scandal erupts. The Associated Press is angry. And no one cares. No one cares at all because they finally realize what's going on here. People are aligned. And a lot of that is just a factor of time. Republicans were like, okay, Republican won the White House. We all get to come back, right? And we can just continue doing Bush era stuff. But after 4 years in office and then 4 years in the wilderness, you've got 8 years of people who have been inculcated and studying this. When I was at the White House on Monday, there's a lot of young people. Who may have been old enough to be bagging groceries during Trump's first term at their local grocery store. Now they're in there, and this is the world that they grew up in. I mean, some of our younger reporters do not even know a political world before Donald Trump was yelling at Ted Cruz about his wife. They don't even know what normal debates look like. They were shocked when they saw J.D. Vance debate the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats. They said, what was that? Well, that's what normal political debate used to look like before it became a WWE match. Everything has changed, and it's for the better.
Yeah, we should say there's two sides. The first administration, they would get rid of people, yes, and that was bad, but it was also good because a lot of people needed to be gotten rid of.
They should not have been hired. They may as well fire.
So he had to cycle through all these people because so many of them needed to be cycled through. But now, as you point out, after all this time, right? The people left. You had the great selector of whether you with the agenda or not was being in the wilderness. And so now it's very clear. And, I think even the people some of them, also way less than last time, but even the people they maybe want to get rid of, they're quiet about.
Did you make it through Valley Forge? Then we know that you're a patriot.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was not a good camp.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get to Tony Jr.'s reply. He says that Trump was just sort of being president in the first go round. This time, he's on a mission hell-bent to get the people who wronged him and the American people. Trump knows what's at stake because they shot him. The world is not enough for evil people that he's fighting, and he knows that. You fight that kind of evil differently. He's going all out for the cause. He definitely is. You can tell that Trump individually at his core is a changed man this time around.
I think you read that wrong, by the way.
I don't think it said
evil people up there.
I can't say the words. I can't say those words on television.
Yeah, you definitely see it. He's a changed man. He's got an agenda. He knows what's up. I mean, for his reputation of saying you're fired, in his first term, he didn't say that to James Comey for a very long time. He never said it to Anthony Fauci. These are people who very much needed to be fired, and he didn't do it. Now I think he understands where a lot of those threats are. However, still sure is taking a long time to get rid of some of those deep state actors that we know are problems. We know are James Comey's. We know are Anthony Fauci's, and we know there needs to be some kind of real reckoning here. But I hope this is because they're taking their time and they're doing it well, and they're making sure that they've got the perfect case so they could actually succeed at this instead of doing it sloppily and having it undone by courts or leading to more hysterics and distracting from the actual administration's business. If they can do it right, then it will be worth the wait.
And certainly we could agree that there are places where we can say that definitely looks like it's happening. There's areas in the administration where you can see people really doing things in a real way. And then there's other places where, you got to give it some time because these things take time, where we might have a question. And our job is to keep questioning, how much you're doing, what's the plan here, and what are you going to accomplish? But at this point, it's way different than before because there are big swaths of territory that people are really doing things.
Well, Heretic Dave will round out our discussion. He likes the people that are coming into play now. He writes, this time around, it's all about the staff. First time, he picked people that he liked. This time, he picked people that know what needs to be done. And I think that's exactly back to your point. Like, just everybody in the administration understands that this is the time to push forward with everything that they have.
We got a lot of funny Twitter names out there, too.
We do.
We got some serious name game out there. I guess this is something that you're seeing across a lot of these comments, and the folks who are watching, is that they're noticing good staffing decisions. And the classic conservative maxim, I think Morton Blackwell coined it, is personnel are policy. Personnel is policy. That's reality. A lot of the reality is that most U.S. congressmen and senators who are kind of squishy actually aren't. Their staff are squishy, and they want to be able to move offices. They want to have relationships. They don't want to do this forever. They didn't come here to throw bombs. They came here to make a living because they watched West Wing or some other stupid show. They hold them back, a lot of these congressmen. And the same was true of the first White House, and it's just not the same here. I mean, you saw Marco Rubio kind of squirming a little bit in that Oval Office meeting, but afterwards he marched up to Zelensky and said, "Take a hike." He's committed.
Yeah, this is the most exciting part of it for me. It's been exciting since the beginning, is the fact that so many of the staffers understand what they're trying to do. Like you said, because they're younger. This is the world they grew up in. They understand what the agenda is. They understand what the mandate is. They know that in their bones. So they've internalized it and they're moving forward. Even if that's not all the people whose faces you see on TV, even if that's not all the people who are employed throughout the entire administration. This is an enormous, difficult project. There are so many of them that we know or you know of, and you can tell. The easy way to tell is, and it's a silly example, but I think it works, is you look at the social media accounts where some of these kids need to be reined in, right? I mean, they need to be reined in. You can tell they know what the agenda is.
You can tell that they know that they're friends with Logan Hall and everybody else back there at BlazeTV. But we're going to spend the rest of the week hanging out with everybody from the Trump administration and bringing you all of the latest here from our nation's capital. That's going to do it for us here on The Mandate tonight. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow.